A's for Alcoholic is a program about recovery. My name is John, and I'm an alcoholic.
And my name is Jerry, and I'm an alcoholic.
Join us as we go through the alphabet of alcoholism, one letter at a time.
Doing all right, Jerry? Yeah, I'm doing all right. They kept telling me last night I looked like Russell Brand, but they kept calling me Russell Vampire, so I can't remember the joke.
Russell Brandpire?
Yeah, I can't do his British accent. I can only do like perverted Harry Potter, but that's Henry Porter.
Henry Porter.
Henry, yeah, he's just like, fucking Henry. Get in a fucking hot tub, Henry.
Russell Vampire.
Get in the van, Henry.
That's
We're
good.
going for a ride to the Tenderloin.
Well, you had a good Halloween?
Yeah, it was pretty good. So far, so good. We take the kid out in a couple days. We get to actually do real Halloween. I mean, this other Halloween is real Halloween, too. It's just ladies in revealing clothes and dudes who are just wearing jean vests who are like, yeah, I'm Schneider from One Day at a Time.
Did you find it difficult to hang out with a bunch of people who were overly intoxicated?
No, not really.
No.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely get out of there before people start spitting and saying the same thing over and over again. I mean, there are a few seated in the crowd who just say the same shit to me over and over again. But I don't judge them for it because I did that exact same fucking thing. I just am looking at like an old videotape of myself. Going,
Yeah.
wow, there's some funny business tonight. It's going to be a little funny here.
People taking shots of like Bacardi, and you're like, God, that's gonna hurt in the morning.
It was all tequila, man, and I'm like, everybody here is going to feel like crap tomorrow, and you know what? I'm going to get up and probably not feel like crap. It's going to be like 99% chance I'm not going to feel as crappy as you. I probably will feel like crap in one way or another, but not like that.
Not like that. You'll be able to get out of bed and won't have the stench of grease paint and Blanco tequila.
Yeah, exactly. You just look like a girl who's just been crying left at the high school dance. That's kind of dark, but you know, that's not even that dark. It's more sad than dark.
I'm sure we could get darker if we wanted to.
Yeah, if she were in the Harry Potter van, the Henry Potter van. Get in the van!
Speaking of dark
Yeah.
places, today is R for rock bottom.
Oh, I gotta stretch out. I gotta stretch out for rock bottom. Well, yeah. You know, funny thing about rock bottom, if I can take the lead here,
Yeah.
is I think, and I've said this before on previous podcasts, when you mention to non-alcoholics that you're an alcoholic in recovery, they tend to think of your bottom immediately. Like, how bad did it get, you know? And when you mentioned to me this was one of the letters, I thought it was very interesting because there are different variations of rock bottom. And rock bottom in of itself, the phrase sounds like this is the lowest absolute point I can get to. And I think sometimes that doesn't ring true for active alcoholics. Like, it's not.
People.
I think you have tons of bottoms. And I think sometimes maybe your rock bottom isn't your lowest bottom. It's just that moment where you just kind of scrape against that a bottom and go, well, fuck, I can't live like this anymore, you know? Because I've had way lower bottoms than the one that actually gave me that moment of clarity where I was like, wow, I am fucking up, you know? Like, this is not manageable. I cannot do this anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's like your analogy for the manhole and on the side of the truck, and you keep trying to like jump out of the car and dive right into the manhole. You do that
and
trick,
just clip the side of it. Yeah,
and
exactly.
sometimes it's like, what if you just kind of put your toe out there and clip your toe, and you're like, oh, that's not good. I better not do that again, and you learn your lesson.
Very simple. Yeah.
Because mine was pretty bad, but it wasn't. You know, again, there was no jail time, and there were no arrests. There was some people who got very hurt, and there was some financial, there was debt that was incurred, and there were some other things that could have gone wrong. But it was just one of those things where it's like I kind of just said, oh, I have to stop this. And I think for me, I actually started to see some patterns, because when you're so into it and you're so kind of just running around being an asshole, for lack of a better word, you're not paying attention to anybody else.
No, it's so self-focused. It's like it's just
Yes.
constant selfie stick.
You know what I mean? Yeah,
it's
totally
like the
is.
fucking eternal selfie stick. It's just look at me. And man, it's even that moment of clarity you have. For me personally, wasn't my worst bottom. It was just when I realized that enough was enough. You know, and it's different for everybody, because whenever I speak of my rock bottom, I always explain the same way you do. I'm like, I didn't go to jail. I didn't end up without a home. I didn't end up, you know what I mean, drinking fucking Sterno or rubbing alcohol. And some people did do that. But that is also what was manageable to them at that point in time. You know, we're all different. So all of our alcoholism, it runs in varying degrees, you know, of what we're willing to accept. And
Right.
it's just, I was done accepting that. You know, and I'm not saying that a low bottom where, like, you know, you're at the very desperate dregs of society is any worse than mine. Do you know what I mean? Is any worse than mine emotionally? It's just some people are hardier than others.
Yes.
You know, their capacity to deal with difficulties is a lot larger than mine, you know.
In a lot of ways, they're a lot stronger. You know?
Absolutely. And I was going to say, you know, I have nothing but respect for those people, because they went out and did that for me, almost, in a way. You know, it's like those are things that I use as an example. There's bottoms where I've been drinking with people, and I remember drinking with a guy one night, and he's like, you know, Jerry, whenever I think about that I drink too much and I'm an alcoholic, I just go out with you, and you remind me that I'm not as fucking bad as you. You know, and like that to me was a bottom. Like that was like the wind knocked out of my lungs.
Yeah.
You know, it was like, wow, I'm an example for this guy. You know, and then there's the obvious ones, the ones that are like crying desperately, ruining relationships, crashing cars. And I didn't kill anybody. I didn't crash a car. I didn't, you know, I stole a lot of shit while I was drunk, but I never got caught stealing shit, you know. But regardless, like, I don't think I hit anybody. I don't remember. There was a night I almost got in a fight, but I ended up falling on the guy because I was so drunk. So that was like the worst fight ever. But, you know, I guess I like the subject because there's just so many different ways to look at bottom, you know, to look
And
at bottoms.
I think the biggest word in some of the is manageability.
Yes,
you know,
that's,
we couldn't
yeah.
manage it. So that's different for everybody. Every single person has something, you know, more that they can manage or less than they can manage, and you go, well, God damn it, this is just not manageable anymore. And in retrospect, I look back at those times where I was, now in my head, I go, good Lord, how did you deal with that? How did you make that work? How did you make that day? How did you make that hangover? How did you not give up? You know, why did you even go on? Like, that was so hard. Today, that would be so hard to manage.
Yes, that would be unacceptable.
It would be unacceptable. I wouldn't
Yeah.
allow myself to even get that far. I don't
Right.
think that I could, you know, and we've discussed this before, where if I ever was going to pick up a drink again, I would have that first drink, and I think I would be immediately like, oh man, this is not going to go anywhere. I don't know that. I mean, maybe I would just fall off the rails and go crazy and be gone for 8 days and maybe come back and maybe not.
Yeah.
But I just feel like, knowing what I know in recovery, I wouldn't even be able to get to that point of unmanageability. I would feel a lot of remorse and guilt, and I would have one drink and I'd be like, this is fucking bullshit. I can't, you know?
Yeah.
I can't say that for sure, and I certainly don't want to. I don't want to find out. But
yeah, it's funny because, like, from my perspective, sober, I can look at it sober and in recovery and trying to live mentally and physically healthy. I can look at that and go, God, I couldn't do that either. I couldn't do it either. But I know, I am incredibly certain that if I started drinking again, I could definitely get back to that place where things that were unacceptable while I was in recovery would become completely acceptable in alcohol, in active alcoholism. Like, because it's almost like you just punch back into the old job again. You know, you're just like, well, I guess I'm back here fucking washing dishes again. So, you know,
I guess I was saying is that I was hoping that my recovery would be strong enough to keep me away from the
Absolutely.
second or third or fourth or fifth drink.
Exactly. And that's positive thinking, though.
Yeah.
That's the fail safe, like, you should have in your mind. Your exit strategy, your fail safe, is that, like, my recovery is strong enough that if a slip ever were to happen, I would hope that I'd be able to pull myself out of it. I mean, I hear the message a lot in a program we go to where it's just like, that's it. You have that first drink, you're fucking fucked. You know what I mean? And you may or may not be. I mean, I've been in recovery with people who have had slips and been perfectly fine, and I've been in recovery with people who I've never fucking seen again. I've been in recovery with people who died in jail from having a slip. I mean, you never know. You never know. It's uncertain. You know, it's incredibly uncertain.
There's also the idea that, like you said, it doesn't take long to get back into it. That your body, they talk about it sometimes that this is a, what do they call it, a degenerative disease, or so that even while you're not drinking, the disease is still there and it still grows inside of you, so that were you to activate it again, it would be at a higher level than it was when you quit drinking, whether that was, 3 days ago or 3 months ago or 3 years ago. So I think about, oh God, what if I took a drink now? Like what kind of madness would it activate? And I don't want to be anywhere near that.
Well, yeah. And then you throw in recovery to that relapse and you're like, woo, you got a head full of program. And now you're like, now you've tasted the good life. I know close people who may have recovered, and I remember talking to someone real close to me about it, and I'm like, that poor person, they're in hell because they know what they're capable of when they're not drinking, and now they're drinking again. And this person, like, I was starting to get worked up about it, feeling empathetic, and also like, that's an awful feeling. And this person was like, you got to look at your 24-hour chip, because that's all you have. That's all you're ever going to get is those 24 hours. So even though this person is going through a relapse, all they have is that 24 hours every day of that relapse over and over again. So they have a choice at that point. Not a choice, but you know what I mean? They do and don't, because I don't really like the word choice, because then it's weird when non-alcoholics talk about alcoholics and they say, oh, well, it's a selfish disease, because it absolutely is. And some people will even say it's not a disease, you're just selfish, which I absolutely am. I'm totally fucking selfish. I'm tailor-made.
You can
for
be both.
alcoholism.
You don't have to be one or the other. You can be both.
But there is a point in time where it goes past becoming a choice and becomes a necessity. Yeah, I will. If I have this drink, I will die, and if I don't have this drink, I will die. You know what I mean? Like, you're fucked if you do, and you're fucked if you don't. I physically need this shit.
Yeah.
It's so complex, and now we're doing this podcast about it, and I wrap my head around it, and I'm like, this shit is just a fucking puzzle box. Like all the thinking that goes into.
It's pretty sinister too.
It is. It's sinister as fuck. It is not like Bud Light Lime on the back porch having a good time. Some dude's got a ukulele playing 311. Like, that wasn't it for me. No.
Amber is not the color of my energy, Jerry.
No, amber's the color of like me vomiting, like, which I never really did, but
I did all the time.
I never did, man.
Good for you.
I know, right?
I don't have to anymore.
No, me neither.
I haven't thrown up in 3.5 years, I don't think. That's great. I mean,
yeah, you know what? I haven't thrown up once in sobriety.
That's great. Feels good.
Yeah, we'll see what happens,
But yeah, it's just that level of manageability. What is it that what are you willing to put up with, and what are you willing to deal with, and when are you going to be ready to want something else?
Right.
And for some people it's just that, and you hear cliched things like slippery slopes, but that's what happens a little bit at a time. Maybe you just lose a relationship and you're like, well, I guess I can be alone. And then maybe you lose your job and you're like, well, I'll be fine for a while. And then maybe you get busted driving drunk, and then you're like, well, I don't have a car, but I'll just ride my bike around, and I don't have a job to worry about anymore, and I don't have a relationship to tell me what to do. And then you're like, so I can do whatever I want. This is great, although it's not really great. And then, you can't afford to live where you live, and you're like, well, I guess as long as I can go, I got a tent. I can,
right.
Or whatever, however it goes. And so it just becomes,
I got a tent.
I don't know.
I'm
I've
Urban Daniel
there,
Boone
thankfully.
here, son. I'm Urban Daniel Boone with a Four Loko. I got a tent, son.
Right?
I got it. Yeah. It's funny. It's such a cuddly fucking, enemy. Enemy's the wrong word. It's like a cuddly monster, right? Because I also feel like sometimes people get their recovery all in line and they got it together, and then they convince themselves that, oh, I can manage this. I can drink in moderation. That's totally fine. This dragon has no teeth. Do you know what I mean? And so you go back into it thinking, oh, I can just do one every once in a while. I have a couple of beers on a special occasion, but then you just fall right back into it. You feel like the dragon has no teeth, but the motherfucker's got tons of teeth. You just feel like there's no threat there until, like you said, until that whole fucking domino theory happens that you brought up, where you're just Yeah, you're just out there, just urban fucking explorer at that point, you know.
It's rough out there, and I've met people who have lived that, and I've sat with them, and
Yeah,
you know, you hold hands with somebody like that, and it's like it's heavy to feel that, and to listen to somebody talk about that, and you know, and you hear about sometimes, you know, I've heard stories of where people have come from, and somebody will tell you this, they've had some exorbitant amount of money just handed to them, and it's gone in like 4 months.
Yeah.
And it's like, holy shit. So it's very easy. And I think that I think in recovery, it's just a matter of, you know, for me, it just gives me this sort of guideline. And you've used the phrase course correction and stuff like that. And it's sort of a textbook for life. And without it, you know, we're all working that program one way or the other, whether it's subconsciously, whether we're controlling it or not. Everybody has one. And I think, you know, everybody, I mean, well, I don't want to say everybody, but I certainly know that I have the potential to fall again. And so that's why I try to be diligent with the things that I do every day. Yeah. In that daily, in the daily practices that I do.
Right.
So I don't ever want to be at that point of unmanageability. That, you know, my standard of living keeps getting higher and higher. My emotional standard of living, my physical standard of living, the amount of money that I prefer to have in the bank. You know what I mean? So those things, they level up, you know, and I don't want it to be the things that are unmanageable now would be a blessing to that person from 3.5 years ago. They'd be like, oh man, think about that. You got money, we could get loaded. And so it's kind of just trying to see it, you know, from those different perspectives, so that, you know, when you get to a crisis point of any kind of like, oh God, should I, shouldn't I, maybe I could, maybe I can't. I mean, that's why I think about it as much as I do, is because I want to understand it. And I don't want to make any mistakes that are going to have serious consequences. Maybe it's not that first drink. Maybe it's the first drink I have now, and then I don't have another one for like 3 months, and then Halloween party comes and I get all messed up, and then I need to have a little something to take the edge off the next day, but I'll wait until 5 o'clock, and then, you know, the next day is the next day is the next day is the next day, and you're already back there again.
Because you already know what you're capable of, and you already know what's manageable for you until it's unmanageable. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, I can manage this, I can manage this, I can manage this, and then at one point you're like, oh, this shit is way out of control. I can't manage any of this. You know, the benefits I've had is just the quality of my relationships with people, and the fact I'm not causing any major collateral damage to my family or to my daughter. You know, I've got a lot of, I think once a tiny human came into my life, my perspective changed a lot too. You know, I always wonder if I would have even gone down this path if I were single without a daughter, but I really feel like I would have eventually, just because the option of suicide, that was my rock bottom. It was just always there. Yeah. It did not become a thing that was, I mean, I don't know. It's polite society. We don't ever talk about it, but it just always sat in my head, you know. It's always sat in my head, and it's not even like it just, in those bad hangovers, it wasn't like, oh, I'll just fucking kill myself. But there were points in time where I would black out and wake up and just be so grateful that I didn't kill myself, because I've done some wild shit and not known I was doing this wild shit. And so I'm like, that option is now fucking fully on the table. Like, I threw that like we were playing poker, I threw that chicken leg in the middle of the pot. Why are you even bringing a chicken leg to a poker game? And I'm like, because I'm a fucking wild card. You know. So like, once it was out there in the open, that's when I started really considering and thinking about the path my life was taking. If this was a solitary path and I was all by myself taking it and I didn't affect anyone, then fine, so be it. You know, like, I'll trudge the road of fucking unhappy destiny or whatever. But there were so many other people around me that were immediately affected by my decisions, like irrevocably, like in front of me, you know, like, man, I had to really consider that. That was my bottom. My bottom wasn't me in a hotel room with a bare light bulb, you know, like, it wasn't me on the streets. It was just me in a fucking field, drunk, with a fucking smashed highball glass, going, is this it? You know, like, is this what the rest of my life is going to be with this kid and my wife? And like, they're going to bounce. So is this what I got? You know, me in a field in Oregon. Yeah. It's crazy shit. You know, everybody's stories are different and the same. We just hit our turning point. We came to a turning point, you know, like.
Yep.
And I'd also like to say too, you know, the program, and I do it every week, but I just have to say, like, it works for us.
Yes.
If you're listening to this for the first time and you're like, my life is fucking totally a dumpster fire and it's unmanageable and I got to get my shit together, we would suggest to you a program because that worked for us. If you feel like, you know, or if you're in recovery now or just sober now without working a program and that works for you, then keep doing whatever you're doing that works for you.
Whatever you're doing. Yeah, man.
Yeah. And I would
there's no
strongly
judgment.
suggest even therapy. Therapy is super helpful. I mean, you go and talk to asking anyone for help or asking an outside source for their perspective is super valuable. If they have your best interest in mind.
Yeah, I think one of the things that recovery does is it gives you the opportunity to ask for help because I never had it before, you know? And I think that everybody ends up sober one way or the other. Some people just get to live through it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
yeah. Look at that. That's Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. Yeah. Well, this won't come out until after Halloween, but thank you guys. I hope you had a good one.
Yeah. Stay sober.
I wanted to ask you about how rock bottom is portrayed in pop culture. You had some thoughts on this.
Well, and that was the thing too, right? It's just exactly the way I mentioned it earlier. It's just a guy in a torn suit walking around mumbling to fucking Marty
newspaper
McFly.
shoes and...
Yeah, newspaper shoes and shit, and or like it. I fucking love this trope in TV shows where you introduce a character who's a recovering alcoholic and then they let that shit sit over the guy like an umbrella. The whole fucking, is he going to drink or is he not going to drink? You know what I mean? Oh, his girlfriend died. He's definitely going to get fucked up now. They put a character in The Walking Dead who was like this total fucking alcoholic and was sober, like a recovering or just a sober alcoholic because he couldn't find booze, I guess, or whatever.
Yeah.
But then after that, like they always would dangle a bottle there, like as part of the trope, and that was that. You know what I mean? Like it's not even the way they portray it, rock bottom necessarily, but just even the disease of alcoholism. It's really funny. It's like a really great device for writers because they're like, oh, so and so has been sober for 8 years, but he just found a bottle of fucking scotch, you know. And some people would do that, absolutely.
It's
but,
immediate high stakes drama without having to write anything else.
I know people who are fucking incredibly wealthy, have it together financially, on the outside appear to have it together completely physically and emotionally, and their rock bottoms were fucking low, sad, dark fucking places. But on their outward appearance was just one of normalcy or one of functioning. You know, the term functioning alcoholic, that whole shit. And I'm not saying like, oh, the media pushes it out. It's just common. It's just the way common knowledge is of it, I guess. It's the way that non-alcoholics talk about it, and I have no problem with non-alcoholics. I love one very much, and it's, you know, I've got a little 8-year-old one who's running around the house, you know, and like I love them, but sometimes they portray it like, you know, like there's this common kind of trope around everybody where they're like, oh, that's it.
Destruction and tragedy and all this stuff, and
tragedy. Yeah.
Sometimes it's not even that dramatic. I mean, it on the outside, you know, it's always.
Right.
It's not that you don't see it, and maybe it's just too much wine in the morning, and maybe it's not. You know, no, I'm serious.
No, I
like,
know,
you
but
know
I'm
what I
laughing
mean?
because, like, to me, I'm like too much in the morning. But yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Or whatever sort of slippery slope, or whatever sort of negotiations you make with yourself, you know, that I would make with myself about when and how much and what kind, and all those things were just this sort of. I think, honestly, I lived in a very shallow bottom for a very long time. I mean, I kind of just wallowed in it. It wasn't like everything was just, there was a lot of good times, and I don't want to deny those. And please, 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 there were some really great times I had while drinking.
Right. That was the gate, right? But that was the gatekeeper that led to the bad times, you know, because you're like, oh, yeah.
There was, and I don't want to deny any of that, because I met some really great people and had some really awesome times. but I feel like in the last several years of me drinking, there were it just was this sort of wallowing in it and finding a way. Functioning is a generous word.
Yeah.
It was a very
Right.
generous word to use for me. I made it to work, barely. I made the rent, barely. I never had any comfort or cushion or of any kind. Forget about fiduciary. It was like emotional or anything. I had no comfort. So it's just really, I think one of the big things, if I could put something out there, is to not judge people by their appearances. Because again, I've sat there with people who seemingly are very affluent and they look healthy and put together, and people who are rough and rugged and worn out. And one of them, the first one's one of the most miserable people in the world, and the other one is this happy, joyous, and free character who you just want to be around.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just it's different for everybody, hitting your bottom and how you get there and how long you stay there. And, it's just the level of self-medication and self-management that you were willing to put up with.
Word. And the other thing too is I once again directly speak to the listener, is that the reason why I felt like this was kind of when I was really interested is that if you're out there and you're like making dinner or fucking driving to work, or maybe you're just, I don't know, cutting hair or whatever you're doing, listening to this podcast, and you're not sober and you're thinking about getting sober, and you have that little alcoholic voice in your brain that's just being like, oh, don't worry about it. It's not that bad yet. You're not homeless. You can manage. You know what I mean? Like, don't listen to that fucker. If it's not manageable, you don't have to be homeless for it to not to be manageable. You don't have to be thinking about suicide constantly for it to not be manageable. You don't have to have those horrible, dark fucking things for it to not be manageable. It could be just as simple as, I am so preoccupied with this. This takes up every single room in my mental house. I'm done with this. That's unmanageable right there. You don't gotta feel like, oh, I'm not gonna hit the ejector seat until this plane's like inches from the ground. Like, bail out. If it's fucking, if you're looking at it, you're like, this doesn't work. It could just be as simple as, this is not working. Bail out. You don't need it. You don't need it, son.
And life is supposed to be more than just manageable.
Yeah, like,
right?
well, I'm just alive to just function. Like, a shoe with the sole taped on it functions. Mm-hmm. This sole's gonna come the fuck off one day. You
Eventually.
know what I mean? Like, that it functions. Hey, it functions. Like, oh, geez.
Well, and that's such a flimsy defense. Hey,
Yes.
man,
I function.
I paid the bills. Like, okay, is that it? Is that it,
Yeah.
dude? Like, that's all you want? And so, I mean, I guess that just wasn't all I wanted anymore when I would say those things. And oftentimes I wasn't saying them to anybody because I was keeping up appearances relatively well.
Right.
And I would just say it to myself. So now I'm fighting in my own brain about whether or not I can have a drink or have too many drinks or not. I shouldn't have any drinks. And
bargaining.
like, my God,
Managing.
Get
Managing's
out of there.
always fun. Yeah.
And now I just like, oh shit, I didn't know that I could feel this good. I can wake up happy, and I can see the sunshine, and I don't want to sleep through the entire day to wake up at twilight and drink some more. That was a miserable existence.
Dude, I went from being upright to like being honest, right? Because people would be like, how are you doing today? And I'm like, oh, I'm upright. And that was like always my answer. I'm upright. I'm walking around. And now people are like, how you doing? And I'm honest with them. I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing too great today. Hopefully it'll get better. Like, this person sucks, or this situation sucks. Or I can be like, yeah, I'm doing pretty good. Or I'm just fair to middling. I'm just hanging around. Maybe I'll have a nice cheese later. I don't know. Maybe I have two nice
Camembert?
cheeses. I really like blue cheese, like creamy shit
stinky.
stinky is kind of strong. Speaking of, this has nothing to do with cheese, but I was telling this story the other day. This has necessarily nothing to do with rock bottom, but like I haven't talked to you yet this week, and I was talking about you and your old roommate. I don't want to put him on blast, but you had this old roommate when you guys lived in Seattle, and I'd come up to visit on the Amtrak, and I'd stay with you guys for like 5 days, and you and your old roommate were in this argument because he found these fucking socks. Do you remember this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they were like, there was nothing special about the fucking socks. They were just like kind of comfy cotton white athletic socks. And you said, hey man, where do you get those socks? And you guys were getting these petty fucking arguments, and he's like, I'm not going to tell you. And then for like, it was like, how long? 6 months? It was like
maybe longer.
It was like for an extended period of time, he would just bring home these bundles of socks and not tell John where he got the socks. And then I came up with him, and he was like, hey, you want to run some errands with me? I'm going to my dry cleaners. And so I went to the dry cleaners, and then we went and got a drink afterwards. But before that, he had bought the fucking socks, and he put the socks. And I had no fucking knowledge of this argument you guys were having. And then he looked me dead in the face, and he's like, don't fucking tell John where I buy these socks, because I'm driving him slowly crazy. And I know it's fucking driving him crazy, so don't tell him. Like, I've got this one thing on him, right? And then, like, that fucking night, we were out all drunk, and I was like, hey, John, dude over here gets his socks at the dry cleaners down in, like, Pine Street. Like, just right off the bat. And I think that was the same night he almost flipped the table over at the nightlight or the knock-knock.
Yes.
But I was telling someone this story, and they're like, you're a fucking dick. And I'm like, yeah, I was a real dick, dude. Like... But that was for the greater good. And this story's going out in that podcast. It's got to go out in the podcast. That was
all right.
The story of the rock bottom socks, I guess. I don't know, man.
Hey, man, so it's a rock bottom is a sock bottom, you know?
It's a sock bottom, dude. Yeah, exactly. I just no fucking loyalty to anybody. I just was like, I want to sow the seeds of discord here even worse. You know, like, hey, by the way, dude gets his fucking socks up there.
Just grab your spoon and like, stir the shit.
You fucking asshole, I'm gonna end your life, you know.
And you know, at that point, and if that came up now, I'd be like, oh, okay, I don't need to know where the socks are.
Deal, yeah.
But it would just become, it was this madness, and I mean that was might have been just our antagonistic relationship, which, from my end at least, not drinking anymore, I'm much more accepting of things than I used to be.
Yeah, your guys' relationship was like Seinfeld with blackouts. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
It was like Seinfeld with like just jumping out of a moving cab. You know, like, yeah.
Totally funny, totally painful and argumentative and abusive and yes.
Yeah. Like, do I need to call the police?
Mm-hmm. No. Probably have to drive somebody to the hospital, but nobody's going to have to call the police. But
oh, man.
It's so
part of me feels like we should. I'm sorry to be interrupted.
No, go ahead.
Part of me feels like we should end every one of these podcasts with like just one little war story. Maybe not though. That might not be healthy. But it makes me laugh though, because when you said maybe I have to drive someone to the hospital, I'm like, bing, remember the hospital trip too, and I'm like, oh Jesus.
Well, if anybody out there listening wants us to do a war story drunk-a-log episode, let us know, because we. And would,
if that makes you feel like gross or uncomfortable, like we won't do it. We'll just tell them to each other, and laugh. Yeah. But I know some people don't like it, and I understand it. Like I don't like it sometimes. No, actually, they all kind of make me laugh. Is that fucked up? Like, except for the sad ones. The sad ones make my heart hurt really bad. But
I think when everybody's laughing, it's a different story. But
right,
and I think it's important to have a great deal of some humor about things, or else it would be pretty miserable. But
right,
I think if I could say any one thing about that rock bottom, it would be that it's different for everyone, and that you can't judge it in somebody else.
Yeah,
everybody has their own brand and style of shit they're dealing with every single day.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
And a little bit of I think a little bit of empathy goes a long way.
Absolutely. And I think I would like to close with you'll know it. If you're in it, you'll know it when you'll see it. You'll feel it, you'll know it, and you'll go, "Oh, this is it. This is what those two guys were talking about on the internet."
Thank you for listening to A is for Alcoholic. Our music is by Neglect. You can find more of his music at neglectsound.bandcamp.com. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and contact us at aisforalcoholic@gmail.com.